And then I'm going to switch us over to our ethics lecture. If it's going to do anything but a black screen. Apparently today is the day for technical difficulty. And it just died. Okay, give me a second here. It's been like this all day. See if I can relaunch this. There we go. Now it's going to work. All right. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
All right. Much better. Not just a straight black screen. Okay. So ethics in information technology, we're going to go through privacy. There's going to be a bunch of stuff on laws and regulations. So we'll talk about that too. Okay. So this one, you guys can go through this if you want to. I'll just walk through this with you right here. So does your organization have a code of ethics? I can guarantee most of them do. If they don't, they're either a startup and they just haven't written it down, or they are very negligent not having one. Or they just have an unwritten one. Do employees know how and to whom to report any infractions of code of ethics? Do employees feel that they can report violations of code of ethics safely without fear of retaliation? Do employees feel that action will be taken against those who violate code of ethics? Do senior managers set an example by communicating the code of ethics and using it in their own decision-making? Do managers evaluate and provide feedback to employees on how they operate with respect to the values and principles in the code of ethics? Are employees aware of sanctions for breaching the code of ethics? And do employees use the code of ethics in their decision-making? So a lot of these, one of the things that I see that is the complaint the most is the retaliation. And that's something that a lot of workplaces have to work hard against stamping out, is that if they report any breaches of it, there is likely to be retaliation, and that's something that they have to stop, because, now there's like whistleblowing laws and things like that, so they can get sued. But also, there are also problems with unethical practices, and they have to stop those as well, because you don't really want those rumors attached to your company. Okay, here are the 5 steps of ethical decision-making process. So develop a problem statement, a clear, concise description of your issue. Don't make assumptions, verify the facts. And that is something that, especially in IT, that you need to do. One thing you have to remember is it's kind of like science, go where the facts lead you. Identify alternatives, enlist help of others, choose alternative, defensible and consistent, consider impact on others, implement your decision, create like a transition plan and put that in, and then evaluate your results. Was it a poor alternative? Was it bad implementation? How did it go? Okay, so here are the learning objectives in part 1. What is the right of privacy, and what is the basis for protecting personal privacy under the law? What are some of the laws that provide protection for the privacy of personal data, and what are some of the associated ethical issues? And what are the various strategies for consumer profiling, and what are the associated ethical issues? And then part 2, what is e-discovery and how is it being used? And why and how are employers increasingly using workplace monitoring, and what are the capabilities of advanced surveillance technologies, and why, and what ethical issues do they raise? Now, I will say a lot of what we're talking about today can be used for your group presentation, so keep that in mind. And this PowerPoint is also out on the website, so you guys can look at that too. Okay, so organizations gather all sorts of personal data to make better decisions. They try to get everything about their employees, and they try to get things about their customers. But especially when they're trying to get new employees, that you can get all sorts of these information that they're looking at. Whether it's ethical or not, how they gather the information is usually the big issue, because there's kind of holes in the laws on whether or not data scraping from social media is ethical and legal, you know, because laws always lag behind technology. So the privacy protection and the law. So we're going to go right into the beginning portions of the laws. The Bill of Rights is the very first one. That's the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which were added to provide more specific guarantees of personal freedoms and rights. Specifically, when you're dealing with privacy, you're going to be looking at the Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. That part right there, remember that, shall not be violated, and no warrants shall be issued, but upon probable cause, another key word there, probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Americans are protected by the Fourth Amendment when there is a reasonable expectation of privacy. And that right there, the reasonable expectation of privacy, is usually where some of the loopholes are put in for that. Yeah, a lot of the people that make the laws have no idea what they're regulating. You are absolutely 100% right. The wording on these, you really have to keep an eye on. One of the things that, since I was in law enforcement for 7 years, no, I was not in a cop or anything like that. I was a forensic evidence specialist, so I was a geek with the geeks. And we always had to tell them, no, you have to have all your warrants and everything in place. And we do not, as forensic scientists or forensic evidence specialists, we don't take the side of the cops. We don't take the side of the person. We don't take anyone's side but the data. And that's really difficult for some people to see, because all we did was we really had to be like, no, we have to create this separation, because otherwise what we do would be considered biased. And that was really difficult for people to understand, because when you have Idaho State Police in front of your name, they assume that means you're a cop. And other cops assumed, okay, that means you work for us. No. And so that was always a bit difficult to get around to them too. And I remember getting in an argument with a law enforcement officer about the Fourth Amendment and warrants when it came to text messages, just to give you an example. And he actually said, I don't understand why we have to have a warrant to search people's text messages. And it just kind of blew me away. There's this, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I said, well, because of the Fourth Amendment. And he said, well, we're the police. We should be able to look at whatever we want to look at. And I said, that's an abuse of power. It did not go well after that. The conversation rapidly declined. But, you know, you have to think about, sometimes people don't understand the difference between abuse of power and Fourth Amendment rights, and that even people who have committed criminal acts deserve to have rights, because otherwise you have these massive abuses of power. Okay. So I'm seeing all sorts of comments in here. I'm glad you guys are talking about it, but I have a lot of background when it comes to the law and the laws too. So that's why I'll be commenting a lot in here. Does anyone have any comments or questions on Bill of Rights or Fourth Amendment before we move on to the next section? Okay. All right, next portion. The right of privacy. This is basically, they're talking about the right to be left alone. Information privacy, that's the combination of communications privacy, or the ability to communicate with others without those communications being monitored, and data privacy, which is the ability to limit access to one's personal data by others. Now, there are a ton of laws. And remember, our laws in America are different than laws in the European Union, the UK, New Zealand, Australia. So everybody has slightly different rights. So one of the first ones, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, believe it or not, yes, this one is in there. This one regulates the operations of credit reporting bureaus. And this is kind of one of the first ones that started coming out, because they started seeing some problems with people hiding things when it came to financial issues. So the first ones that you see in the data, a lot of them have to do with the financial sector. Then there's the Right to Financial Privacy Act. This one protects the records of financial institution customers from, and this is the section here, unauthorized scrutiny by the federal government. This, however, does not cover disclosure to private businesses or state and local governments. Gotta look for those loopholes. You gotta love them. Now, this one, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, a lot of people don't know about this one. In fact, I did not know about this one until I was in my master's class, and it's actually quite important. This one, or just call it GLBA, the bank deregulation law, that includes 3 big personal privacy rules. Financial privacy rule, which established mandatory guidelines for the collection and disclosure of personal financial data. It gives you the right to opt out. Customers can refuse to give institutions the right to share personal data with third parties. Gives you the opt-in. Customers who do not take action to opt out automatically opt in. Safeguard rules requires financial institutions to document a data security plan to protect personal data, which they did not have before. And pretexting rule that addresses attempts by people to access personal information without proper authority. So here you see them starting to make the framework for personal information and data. As you can see, the opt-out, opt-in, and as I'm sure you've noticed if you've gone to any website, one thing to think about is, as we're going through this, how do you feel when you go to a website and it's like you have to opt in to all of these cookie options if you want to use our website? Do you think that's legal? Maybe, maybe not. How does it look against these laws? This is something to think about. Okay, there's the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act. And if you want to stop on any of these, wave your hand or just ask a question. This allows consumers to obtain a free, stop it. Sorry, I have a cat that likes to just yell. And for some reason, the other cats like to wind her up to make her yell. This allows consumers to obtain a free credit report once each year from each of the 3 primary consumer credit reporting companies, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Consumers who suspect that they've been or may become a victim to identity theft can place an alert on their credit files. Okay. Now, these two, especially the first one, the HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. If you're doing anything with medical records, you need to know this one. This one includes provisions designed to improve the portability and continuity of health insurance coverage, reduce fraud, waste, and abuse in health insurance and healthcare delivery, and simplify the administration of health insurance. I think that we need to add some more stuff to that given our healthcare industry, but before this, there really weren't a whole lot of rules on safe sharing of medical records. And I remember when they put this in and they required, especially for billing, a lot of specialty changes for billing, like, for example, you couldn't just stream unencrypted data. You had to break it up in chunks so that people couldn't just do a man-in-the-middle attack and, snag all your records. HIPAA was responsible for a lot of this coming into play. Then there's the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. This one includes provisions related to electronic health records, bans the sale of health information, that was a big one, and it promotes the use of audit trails and encryption. Now, audit trails and encryption, audit trails give you the ability to go back and track what happened. So if you ever have to do like anything with finances and go back, they have what are called forensic accountants, which to me just is one of the two most horrifying things put together. I actually have a friend who does this for the FBI, and I'm just like, oh, this is something that sounds like it's out of a horror movie. But they go back and they go back through and audit everything, everything. And these audit trails are important for things like that. Okay. Now, because I've done a lot of work with education, I'm also familiar with FERPA, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. This is also something as college students that you should be aware of. This assigns parents rights regarding their children's educational records, including rights to access educational records maintained by a school, demand the educational records be disclosed only with student consent. That one right there is important for you guys. Amend educational records and file complaints against a school for disclosing student records. Before this, there weren't a whole lot of ways for people to punish schools for disclosing confidential school information. And it didn't really give the schools, it was just like, so what? We had a data breach, who cares? Well, FERPA put in these massive fines so that they actually cared about leaking these large amounts of data. And COPA is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. This one is specifically aimed at children that are 13 and under. This one gives parents control over collection, use, and disclosure of their children's personal information over the internet. So this is why you see so many things that have different user agreements depending on age. It's because parents demanded the rights, and rightly so, to look at all this stuff and go, hey, you can't sell my kids' information, they're underage. And salesmen before had just been getting away with, data scrapers and salespeople had been getting away with murder on just stealing this information because the kids, of course, they didn't read the big, lots of text. All they knew was, hey, I can get on here with my friends, click. That's all they cared about. So this, yep, yeah, throw a shell at them. Yep. So this is giving parents the rights to their children's personal data. Here is, and this one goes only out to 2015. There are significantly more that have happened now, but this is a good timeline that goes over a whole bunch of the important ones all the way up here to the USA Freedom Act. And these are, if you look, these are the ones in the United States. These are not, you don't see like the European Union GDPA, I think is what it is. which we'll talk about later too. Okay, Title III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act regulates the interception of wire and oral communications. So this is usually called the Wiretap Act. It allows state and federal law enforcement officials to use wiretapping and electronic eavesdropping if a warrant is issued. And those warrants, again, have to have probable cause. And that means that they can't just wiretap or electronic eavesdrop without using the proper steps. Yeah. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. This one describes procedures for electronic surveillance and collection of foreign intelligence information in communications between foreign powers and their agents. So this allows surveillance without a court order within the US for up to a year, unless the surveillance will acquire the contents of any communication to which a US citizen, permanent resident, or company is a party. This requires the government to obtain an individualized court order before it can intentionally target a US person anywhere in the world. So basically this is saying, don't spy on US citizens, which, you know, is kind of laughable to us now, but this is what that originally said. FISA court. So a court established by FISA meets in secret to hear applications for orders approving electronic surveillance anywhere within the US. So this just gives you the ones between 2001 and 2015. And if that scares you, only 12 of the applications of 25,000 were rejected. They're a little happy to hand those out, in my opinion, but I can understand because they probably have like 5 people doing all of those applications, knowing how some of these courts run. Next, executive order, an official document used by the US president to manage the operations of federal government. I think we all know about executive orders, especially after Trump. Subject to judicial review and may be struck down if determined to be unsupported by statute or the Constitution. So Executive Order 12333 identifies the various US governmental intelligence gathering agencies and defines what information can be collected, retained, and disseminated by these agencies. Okay. Next, we're on to the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. Like I said, there's a lot of laws, or ECPA. This law passed as an amendment to Title III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act, deals with 3 main issues: protection of communications while in transfer from sender to receiver, protection of communications held in electronic storage, and prohibition of devices from recording, dialing, routing, addressing, and signaling information without a search warrant. National Security Letter. This is issued by the FBI director to an internet service provider, requires the ISP to provide various data and records about a service subscriber, compels holder of your personal records to turn them over to the government, is not subject to judicial review or oversight. An NSL gag provision prohibits NSL recipients from revealing that the government has requested an individual's records. Usually you see these when they're dealing with cases of like treason. Sometimes they've done these when they're doing things where they're dealing with like RICO cases or big kitty porn rings, things like that, where they have like massive amounts of illegal data that they're trying to get from an ISP. And they go through this in order to not give the suspects a heads up that there is something coming. Now, whether or not that is Ethical or moral is up to, depending on how it's being used personally. Pen register is a device that records electronic impulses to identify the numbers dialed for outgoing calls. A trap and trace is a device that records the originating number of incoming calls for a particular phone number. Now, these have been a little bit harder to use as things like VoIP technology have come in, because people can reroute them and bounce them off of multiple items. Communications assistance for law enforcement, or I think it's CALIA, required the telecommunications industry to build tools into their products for use by federal investigators after obtaining a court order to intercept communications. Now, there is a bit of a backlash from the technology industry, which I understand, because so many times they'll build those tools into the products and then they'll be leaked. So that's all well and good that they were created for federal investigators, but when they're leaked out on the dark web, now everybody can get to them. So companies like Apple have said, no, we're not going to hand over a skeleton key to our products, even if it's for a federal investigator. So it's been kind of a fight between technology and law enforcement on that. So it's, personally, to me, I feel like if you give someone a skeleton key or create a skeleton key, there's somebody out there that will eventually steal it. So I can see why they thought this was a good idea, but coming from the technology side of it, it's also like, dude, this is a really horrible idea if you think about it from the technology and security side. What do you guys think? In your opinion, what would you, if for example, your cell phone provider happened to have this suite of tools, would it make you feel secure or paranoid?
Time to find a new cell phone provider.
Yeah, exactly.
Personally, that's how I would feel. Yep. I don't know if you guys remember the case, one of the most famous cases where this came head to head was in California, where they had the husband and wife shooters and the iPhone that was locked. Do you guys remember that one?
Yes, San Bernardino.
Yes, yeah. Yes. And Apple said no. No, we won't do that. Eventually, the FBI did get it cracked. I think they hired someone to crack it, but Apple said no, we're not going to. They basically wanted Apple to create a skeleton key to that device, and they said no, because if we create this skeleton key, then that's not just to this device, it's to every other device like this. So personally, I think they were correct in saying no, and no go fish. And that's what I mean, if I owned the company, I would have said that too, because from a security standpoint, yeah, good for Apple for once. Yeah, I was surprised. I thought they would have been like, here you go, but they actually did the right thing on that one, in my opinion. Next, there's the USA Patriot Act, which, depending on the person, is good, bad. I think it's got a lot of power that can be used for a lot of bad and a lot of good, depending on the application. So this gave sweeping new powers to both domestic law enforcement and U.S. international intelligence agencies. It increased their ability to search telephone, email, medical, financial, and other records past 5 weeks after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And yeah, this caused this act here, I think, is basically given, I don't know anybody that isn't like, yeah, we're being watched by the United States, there's nothing we can do about it. Where before this, it would have been a horrifying thought. Now it's just kind of a reality to all of us.
It was a reaction. It was a reactionary act. They basically used a tragedy to push through, and basically it was closing the door after the barn's on fire.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it did any good for what it was meant to be aimed for. And I think it's used as a hammer when they really needed a needle. So a lot of times it's used to be bashed through things when you don't need to use it that way.
Well, yeah, every problem's a nail now.
Yep, exactly. Next, we have the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Amendments Act. You gotta love when they throw extra stuff in there. Daniel, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, are you guys kind of tuned into what's going on with the Restrict Act? Is that dead in the water, or is that still up in the air?
I don't know. I haven't looked to see if, as far as I know, it's still up in the air. I haven't seen anything that says one way or the other. Is anyone else seeing if it's being revised? Yeah, last I saw, they were like, here's our thing, and everyone went, ah, so I'm hoping that, because it would really cause, I think it is far too generic, and it's just basically another Patriot Act only aimed at purely technology. And I think it gives them it's way too invasive, and they need to be more specific, because I think otherwise it's definitely going to be abused. There's just no way around that one. It's definitely going to be abused. Stop it.
There's no way that act could be abused. Come on, people.
Absolutely no way. None whatsoever. Okay, so the next one, this one's authorized intelligence gathering on individuals not affiliated with any known terrorist organization. They termed these lone wolves, basically individual terrorists is how they termed this. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 78 and 2008. This one granted the NSA expanded authority to collect, without court-approved warrants, pay attention to those, international communications as they flow through U.S. telecom network equipment and facilities. All right, Patriot sunsets in, apparently I can't say these unless they're tongue twisters, Patriot Sunset Extensions Act of 2011. This law that granted a 4-year extension of roving wiretaps and searches of business records also extended authorized intelligence gathering on their quote unquote lone wolves. And there's the USA Freedom Act. This law passed following revelations by Snowden. It terminated the NSA's bulk collection of telephone metadata, and telecommunications providers are now required to hold that data and respond to NSA queries.
Didn't the DEA just get in trouble for bulk buying from T-Mobile?
I didn't see that one. I would not be surprised. They've gotten in trouble for things like that in the past.
I'll see if I can't find an article.
Yeah, if you find the article, link it, and we'll talk about it. Fair information practices. Yeah, telecoms in general in the United States, it is a rabbit hole when it comes to laws and things like that. So fair information practices are considered a set of guidelines that govern the collection and use of personal data. And then there's trans-border data flow. That's the flow of personal data across national boundaries. Fair information practices form the underlying basis for many national laws addressing data privacy and data protection issues. So, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, I swear they just like to name these to give them the most difficult acronyms possible. International organization that sets policies and procedures, agrees agreement on topics for which multilateral consensus is required. The OECD Fair Information Practices Guidelines are composed of 8 principles: collection limitation, data quality, purpose, specification, use limitation, security safeguards, openness principle, individual participation, and accountability. Yeah, that's the problem with the law. Anytime you're going through laws, every single one of them has some sort of shorthand in there that you can use. Okay, European Union Data Protection Directive. This one ensures that data transfer to non-European Union countries is protected. Only US companies certified as meeting certain safe harbor principles were allowed to process and store data of European consumers and companies. European United States Privacy Shield Data Transfer Program Guidelines. This replaced the Safe Harbor Agreement between the US and the EU, which was declared invalid by the European Court of Justice. Places stronger obligation on US companies to protect the personal data of EU citizens and requires stronger enforcement by US agencies. Now, the European Union, when they started doing the privacy, the data protection of their citizens, I mean, a lot of the stuff that they've done is fantastic. It's more about, I really wish the United States would do a lot of this stuff, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. But they basically tried to make it safer for all the people and making sure all of their data was safer, even among law enforcement agencies. So if you ever want to see the huge difference between how the United States and some of the other industrialized nations treat data privacy, go look at some of the basic tenets of what the European Union did. It is a vast difference. Have any of you looked at any of the European Union stuff?
I remember they tried to pass a digital bill of rights, I think a couple of years back, but I didn't really follow up if that actually happened.
I think that's because corporations don't really want to see that, because that knocks into a lot of data, you know, how they just have the huge data processing places they don't want. So they don't really want any of that redone. And then our big name agencies don't really want to have a whole lot of that redone either. So we have a lot of little tiny nitpicky laws that are going to have to be redone in order for any of that to go anywhere. And I don't think until we have a bipartisan endeavor, which we all know how well those go, that's actually going to happen. Yeah, and in Russia and in, let's see, what's another one? North Korea. A lot of them have China also. They have their own internet that is, sorry, I had to take muscle relaxers really early this morning because I had muscle spasm and having a hard time with some of the words. They block a lot of the things that they don't want people to have access to. Twitter was used a lot for different like social injustice things, so they started blocking that. And it's pretty common in places where you have dictatorships for them to have their own state-sponsored internet so that they can control the flow of data. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but I actually just read something about that. It's not really pertaining to kind of what we're talking about. It actually pertains to Vladimir Putin. One of his actual FSO agents actually defected recently to UK, and in the process, he was interviewed, and he basically disclosed like a lot of what's going on over there. Apparently, Putin himself, whenever he travels, he refuses to watch any other third-party news source and strictly wants to see Russia only news outlets. So it's creating like a really big isolation for him too. So it kind of goes back to like, yeah, Russia is just, they're very much media controlled by the government and whatnot.
Yeah, they have their state-run TV channels. I mean, if you think about what that would do, I mean, if you think about like all of our news channels, not just one, all of them being run by the government, that's what they do there. Their internet, everything, all of the news that you get, unless you specifically seek out a third-party source, runs through the government. So you are not going to be getting the truth out of them. You're going to be get a government spun story out of countries like this. And it's one place that it was really apparent was when they were having, I think it was about 5 years ago, might have been longer, when they were having the riots in Egypt. I don't know if you guys watched the news on any of that. They started using like Twitter and some of the other social media apps to organize. And then they started just hard blocking and shutting down all of that stuff so they couldn't organize, and they had to go through like encrypted things, like they were using WhatsApp. And it was really interesting to see how they would shift from platform to platform to get around those blocks so that they could organize the protests. Yeah, it's crazy. So the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, that's the big one that the European Union passed. This is the one I recommend you go look at if you get a chance and want to look at what the European Union's done. This has made a huge difference in security and data privacy worldwide, and has kind of been used as a measuring rule for a lot of the other ones too. So it was passed in 2016, and it was designed to strengthen data protection for individuals. So that'd be like if we mattered. That's just me being sarcastic. If we mattered more than corporations and other things within that, then that's what they went after. They said, hey, you know what? Maybe we should make sure that our people, all of their data gets taken care of, no matter where it is in the world. And if you're going to be dealing with our citizens' data, you have to pass all of these guidelines. There was a lot of complaints worldwide from different telecom companies when it first came out, because they were like, oh, we don't want to have to deal with this, you know, because they had to have different encryption standards and things like that that were updated when they were dealing with European Union citizens. Otherwise, they would not be allowed to be registered as compliant. And they basically, when it first came in, it looked like kind of like a giant massive tantrum is what it was like watching. And once they realized, oh, okay, this is not going to get repealed, and we actually do have to do this, then they started, you know, grumbling and changing things around. Okay. Onward, Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. This one grants citizens the right to access certain information and records of federal, state, and local governments upon request. So these are your public records requests. There are two basic requirements for an FOIA request. The request must not require a wide-ranging, unreasonable, or burdensome search for records. So this means that you can't request something that has like an insane amount of man hours for, like, if you put in a request that's going to be like 170 man hours for like what part one, you know, they're going to tell you, no, this is not something we can do. The request must be made according to procedural regulations published in the Federal Register. So basically you have to go by their guidelines, and you have to have specific pointed searches that you're requesting on this information. Did I see something about? Yeah, Area 51 too. Yeah, no, too much man hours, too many records, denied. Exactly. Then there's the Privacy Act. This one sets rules for the collection, use, and dissemination of personal data kept by federal agencies. Prohibits U.S. government agencies from concealing the existence of any personal data record keeping system. Now, a lot of these rules originally start as ways to govern the federal government record keeping, and then they start disseminating out towards state and local, and you see them kind of drop down in chain as they go out to the rest of the United States. Yeah, as long as they're on US soil. Okay. So what is this? Profiling? Privacy and anonymity issues. This is consumer profiling. This is always fun. So information about web surfers can be obtained through the following use of voluntary methods, which is website registration, survey contests, and social media. This is often called footprinting, cookies, text files that can be downloaded to the hard drives of users who visit a website. So the website's able to identify your visitors on subsequent visits. And then there's always the ever-present tracking software you can use. This allows a website to analyze browsing habits and deduce personal interests and preferences. Now, what I find interesting is tracking software in the use of things like carts for like Amazon. Technically, the stuff that you're using when you put it in your cart that analyzes your browsing habits and personal interests for shopping, that's technically tracking software, but all of us are more interested in being able to have better shopping experiences than realizing that's a whole bunch of tracking software. So when we go through the ethical hacking, we will do a section on footprinting, and I will have you guys go out and look yourselves up online and see what kind of things you can find through just the voluntary methods. You'll be surprised at how much you can find. There are some people that have generic enough names that you're like, meh, there's nothing out there. And then there are some people that are like, hey, this is way too much information. And I can give you guys some ways to get some of that off.
So about that,
Yep.
When I was attached to CSEC for my deployment to Iraq, I had to go through like an interview process beforehand where they actually did some like social media scraping and whatnot. They took my name and searched for it, and unfortunately they couldn't pull me up because me and my dad had the exact same name. His name is Michael Stephen Schaefer Jr. And since the doctor's fucked up on my birth certificate, I'm also Junior.
Yeah, and that's a problem you run into. And one thing that you're running into with consumer profiling that I'm seeing more and more within the last 5 to 10 years is employment profiling. I mean, the Army has done that for years. The military, they go through everything when you sign up. Just if you're going to be signing into one of the 3-letter agencies, you're going to have that happen. Anywhere you have a top secret clearance or anything like that,
yep,
you're going to get a lot of that. And so you had them go through everything, I'm sure.
Yeah, they actually they were asking me why I lied, and like oh, well, we're starting to hear that you lied. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, well, one of the questions was, did you ever declare bankruptcy? And you marked no. I'm like, because I never did. Like, well, we have the records here that show that you did back in, it was like 2003 or something like that. I'm like, I was like fucking, I don't know, 13 years old back then. You think I was declaring bankruptcy?
I did not have a credit card back then. Yeah, and making sure that they have the correct records is impressive. Yeah. When you're going through employment, there are even some colleges that are doing that now for if they're the ones that have the harder interview processes, like some of the Ivy League schools, they're doing social media data scraping now, and have been for a while. So And they're like, well, we don't really want you to be a representative of our school because you said, bleh, So it's one of those, really look at your social media settings and delete everything that you don't want out there. So consumer profiling is a big thing, and it's being turned around and used in a lot of ways. So criticism of consumer profiling. So personal data can be gathered and sold to other companies without the permission of consumers who provide the data. That happens constantly. Risk of a data breach, the unintended release of sensitive data or the access of sensitive data, like your credit card number, social security, by unauthorized individuals. And I don't know about you, but I know that I see them several times a year where they're like, such and such just had a massive data breach. And, if you use this service, then you need to go change your passwords and make sure nothing got released, and go put freezes on your credit report, or, things like that. Risk of identity theft. The theft of personal information, which is then used to the owners without the owner's permission, often commit fraud or other crimes. This has become so common that they have government channels that are just specifically meant for risk of identity theft. And I remember when I was a kid, you could not get it. Once you got a social security number, that stayed the same. Done. Now, because of identity theft, you can actually have, as long as you put a police report in, you can get a different social security number if you absolutely have to. That's how bad it has become for identity theft. Yep, you can get cards, you can get, there's lots of different things that you can see now that just weren't there, but I have to make those available now because these are all, consequences of this consumer profiling. Key privacy and anonymity issues for electronic discovery. So e-discovery, this is the collection, preparation, review, and production of electronically stored information for use in criminal and civil actions. Electronically stored information, or ESI, is any form of digital information stored on any form of electronic storage device. Predictive coding, this is a process that couples human guidance with computer-driven concept searching in order to, quote, train document review software to recognize relevant documents. So basically, a person and an AI or another program get together and you teach that what's important for it to scan through.
Wasn't there like a huge issue with the predictive coding? Like I want to say it was like Florida. It was something to do with their the prison system, and it was like people up for review, and the coding in general was biased against
Predictive coding and AI in general are biased and have been shown to be biased because the people who were training them have unconscious bias, and they didn't realize that until it started showing up in the programs. For example, they're racists. Some of the AIs are. People with darker skin tone do not, it doesn't see them as people on some of the facial readers.
Yeah. There was that, and then there was like one where it was they were using it predictive coding to predict the chance of a repeat offense, and they were basing their people getting up for parole or not getting paroled out of prison for it, and they ended up coming up with the numbers, and it was like you were like 85% less likely, no matter the crime, if you were non-white in the Florida penal system.
Yeah, I could believe it. Because there's a lot of unconscious bias when you're dealing with the human. If you're using a human to train the machine, a lot of the times they don't do a check after the fact on those training processes. And then later they're like, wait a minute, we're seeing these patterns here. Why didn't anyone catch them? Because they didn't review after the fact. And a lot of times when they're doing those predictive texts, they're seeing and creating these linking patterns that aren't really a linking pattern. They're just, it's just the computer seeing these things that it thinks, oh, these link together, but they don't really. It's just coincidence, and it just happened to create a false pattern. For example, they were training a visual, I can't remember what the program was, but it was taking pictures of cancerous cells or cancerous moles or something, and like through hundreds of pictures, and saying this one's cancerous, this one's is not cancerous. Well, they found out later on accident that anytime there was a ruler in the picture, it immediately said it was cancerous, because it picked up that whenever there were pictures, a lot of the times for medical stuff, they put a ruler in there because they're checking the size. So the computer went, oh, there's a ruler, cancer. So, I mean, it picks up little things like that we don't think of, and we have to go back and go, no, this is not a legitimate pattern. So, you know, we're basically just teaching it our bad habits, and that's why independent review and peer review for other people is all because a good idea, because you never know what patterns you're accidentally teaching them. It never occurred to them, hey, if I put a ruler next to this, it's going to think it's got cancer, you know. Daniel?
I think I found what you were talking about with the like racist profiling AI. It was Chicago PD, and it shut down last year because of how bad the results were. It went from, it would have been a couple years ago. It was 8 years from 2012 to 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, I mean, and there's a lot, that's actually, they found racism in a lot of anything having to do with skin tone. They just didn't realize it because they originally just happened to feed it all these pictures of white people as what they originally fed it. They didn't think, oh, geez, maybe we should have a little, you know, a large mix of different races. And you know, the computer was like, well, I've never seen this. I don't know what to do with it. And, you know, we forget how literal computers are. You know, they're basically like kids, you know, how rude and literal children can be. So they're just kind of the same way.
The other issue is they don't actually go, the company pushes out the software to someone who buys it because it lowers their bottom line, so they spend less money on human, because it's software, it does the job for them. But the issue is they push out the software and it's a one and done software, maybe a patch here, a patch there, but no actual, they don't retest anything. They don't verify results.
Yeah. And that's sadly something that you see a lot with that type of AI predictive software. And it's something you see a lot with like the Internet of Things hardware that uses sensors like that too. Okay, cyber loafing. Let's see. Key privacy and we're talking about workplace monitoring. So using the internet for purposes unrelated to work, such as posting to Facebook, sending personal emails or texts, or shopping online. Private employers may legally monitor employees using any of the employer provided, and there's the key right there, employer provided mobile phone or computing devices, or one thing they don't have on here is if it is also their like internet, their networking, it's the same thing. If you're hooking up with your cell phone to their Wi-Fi, technically they can monitor your traffic if you're not using a VPN or something like that. The Fourth Amendment does not limit how a private employer treats its employees. Yay. State privacy statutes tend to favor employers over employees, which all of us know from our experience with employment, I'm sure. Okay. Advanced surveillance technology. Yeah, networks can also be monitored. In fact, to give you an example, school districts, because they have to deal with HIPAA, FERPA, and COPA, they are required to give a technology use agreement to everyone who uses any of their equipment, any of their networking phones, everything. Well, I guess they're not required, but it is really bad if they don't, because if you don't make someone sign this piece of paper saying, yes, I acknowledge this, they can turn around and sue you, especially when it comes to a kid. If that kid is misusing it and their parents say, hey, I didn't say that these kids could even use this technology. Why are they using this? And you don't have a permission slip or anything like that online. There you go, lawsuit. So because basically you're surveilling their child through the technology. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about when it comes to surveillance. Also something to think about with camera surveillance, since we're going to be talking about this. Civil liberties and camera surveillance worldwide, completely different views on how cameras should be used when it comes to legality. School districts can have cameras. They are not allowed to have them within the classrooms. I don't know if many of you know that. They can have them in the hallways, but that's for a safety issue. They can have them in buses, safety issue again. You can use the footage when you're talking to parents, but you cannot show the parents any other kids but their own kid, because they would need permission from everyone else on there. So you have to be able to have technology that will block out the other kids on that. As if there's like an incident, say, for example, some kid has a weapon on the bus, and you catch that on the bus. Well, you have to blur out all the other kids' faces in order to show their parents that. Otherwise, you just violated every single kid, their parental rights on that bus as well. So camera surveillance and how it's used is very dependent upon the situation and the environment that it's used in. Yeah, child privacy rights are strict with good reason, but yeah, really, especially if you're doing anything that has to deal with kids, you need to look at a lot of the laws on that. Camera surveillance. So used in major cities around the world to deter crime and terrorist activities. The criticism on this is such scrutiny is a violation of civil liberties, and the cost of the equipment and people required to monitor the video feeds is excessive. So those are the two views on that. Is this really going to deter crime and terrorist activity? And is that cost of that monitoring and video and all of that, is that worth those two things? So it's been an ongoing debate for years. Vehicle event data recorders. This is a device that records the vehicle and occupant data for a few seconds before, during, and after any vehicle crash severe enough to deploy the vehicle's airbags. So the purpose of this is to capture and record data to make changes to improve vehicle performance, and it's for use in a court of law to determine what happened during a vehicle accident. They're kind of like the black boxes of cars when it comes to making sure they can figure out what happened during an accident. Stalking apps. These are very fascinating when it comes to security. Oh. Yeah, I'm kind of up in the air when it comes to cameras, because I feel like used correctly, and that's kind of the part that's difficult, is you really have to have them deployed in the correct areas, because I think if you put them everywhere, that is way too expensive. And it's also a civil liberties issue because they don't need to be everywhere. But I do think there are certain cases where they've helped a great deal. Roombas, I don't know if they've had, I haven't looked.
So Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So speaking of the whole Teslas and built-in cameras, I was actually reading a article recently on how this guy, I believe he was a current active duty sailor. He drives a Tesla. Anyway, he kept to go to a gun store just so he can do whatever he does at the gun store and whatnot. And when he's coming out, ATF decided to surround him and the gun store owner, basically arrest him. And when they opened his trunk, they found like all these decked out rifles and whatnot, stuff that would be worth thousands. So they're all starting taking pictures of him, like, oh yeah, check out all these cool guns this guy has and whatnot, like trying to flash them off and post on their social media.
Mhm.
And one of them wanted to go search your car. He's like, no, don't search my car, because if when you open that door, it's going to stop recording. All of a sudden, they all just stop and start acting a lot more professional, because at that point they knew they were getting recorded.
Yep. It's amazing how much more polite people are when they're being recorded, which is why body cams were brought up. Stephen, I saw your hand up. Yes, no? Yeah, schools, yeah, they have those. Ring cameras, okay, so I'm going to tell you right now, I do not like Ring cameras because they have a history of releasing footage to law enforcement without warrants. And while I feel like I'm like, you know, there are people out there that are like, well, if you aren't doing anything illegal, it wouldn't matter. The warrants are there for a reason. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't feel that releasing someone's personal videos off the Ring camera, la-di-da, that can be very easily abused. And I was very, very upset when I found out that they were doing that. So I will not buy Ring cameras. I do not buy any of their products. I do not have my clients buy any of their products. And in fact, when I talked to the school district, when we were putting different cameras in, I steered them away from that as well, because you don't really want to have people who are not looking for warrants have cameras around children. So, yeah.
That actually went into what I was going to talk about, was the issues with Alexa.
Yep. Yep, that's another one. Go ahead.
Just how many data breaches they've had, how much they've actually shown that they're recording when they're not supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. I had to have a huge argument, and we had to just flat out ban any of those, because we had to, and I had to give a class showing why smart speakers in general were a bad idea and were against the COPA Act in the classroom, because they record all the time. And there are enough studies and enough breaches showing that when you have these ones that are voice activated, that they are on. They have pulled the data off the servers and been like, yeah, this stuff should never have been recorded, but here we go. So we said, no, you cannot use these in a classroom. This is against COPA. You are using this in a classroom, you're recording their children, and you are not, this technology is basically taking the rights of that privacy away from the students. Did I see someone's hand pop up?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, haven't they told them themselves like frequently? Because I remember there are cases of domestic abuse where they use the Alexa recording, like they just kind of volunteered it, if I remember correctly. I'll see if I can't find that one as well, but
I would not be surprised. Like I've tried to explain to a lot of people, if there's anything that uses voice activation, assume it's recording all the time. Better safe than sorry, because a lot of them are recording all the time, which is why I don't have smart speakers in my house. Yeah, right. And there's my phone already tries to put stuff when you say anything. There was a really interesting privacy thing that said, how do you test whether or not your phone or whatever device it is recording you? And they had some really interesting takes on that. They said, one of the fastest ways to do that is just start randomly mentioning things that you have never talked about before, and then start checking to see what's brought up. It's really fascinating to see. Okay. Next, onward to stalking apps. This is software that can be loaded onto a cell phone or a smartphone. It performs location tracking, records calls, views text messages sent or received, records URLs of any website visited on the phone. These are illegal to install on the phone without permission of the phone owner. But, I've seen this happen a lot. I've actually had people I've had people come to me who were victims of this and sought my help to remove information and better secure their information and devices after having something like this happen. They're pretty spooky what you can do with these. All right, summary. So for part one, what is the right of privacy and what is the basis for protecting personal privacy under the law? So the right of privacy is the right to be left alone. Information privacy, communications privacy, the ability to communicate with others without those communications being monitored. And data privacy is the ability to limit access to one's personal data. The needs of those who use information must be balanced against the rights and desires of the people whose information is being used. Without a reasonable expectation of privacy, there is no privacy right to protect. What are some of the laws that provide protection for the privacy of personal data? And what are some of the associated ethical issues? So few laws provide privacy protection from private industry. There is no single overarching national data privacy policy in the US. They've tried a couple of times, like people have mentioned, and they've just been batted apart by mostly corporations because they really don't want to see that happen. And a range of laws, executive orders, and court rulings govern the privacy of personal data. What's disturbing is when you go back and look at how old some of those are in regards to the data, the data and the technology they're supposed to be governing. Okay, and this is just a huge chunk of all the different acts and extensions, and there are several more that have been added in the last 7 years since this has been updated. What are some of the laws that provide protection for the privacy of personal data? So fair information practices, the OECD, the EU data protection, and the European Union, all the stuff that they had on there. The general data protection, the GDPR. I really would love to see us get something like that here someday. There's the Privacy Act. What are some various strategies for consumer profiling and what are the associated ethical issues? Companies use different methods to collect personal data about visitors to their websites, including using cookies and tracking software. Companies that cannot protect or do not respect customer information have lost business and have become defendants in class actions stemming from privacy violations. Then there's the data breaches, the unintended release of sensitive data or the access of sensitive data by unauthorized individuals. Some states have passed data breach notification laws requiring companies to quickly notify affected customers. And then we talked about e-discovery and predictive coding. Why and how are employers increasingly using workplace monitoring? A lot of it is they're trying to, they're trying to cut down on employee abuse of workplace resources, is what they said, which is really interesting because I've also read some studies that said that they actually get more quality work if people can work and do something dumb for a couple of minutes, like play a game, text, whatever, and then go back to work, because then you can shift your brain back and forth instead of just burning your brain out on one specific course of action. 80% of US firms record and review employee communications and activities on the job, including phone calls, email, web surfing, and computer files. The use of fitness trackers in the workplace has opened up potential new legal and ethical issues. So there are some places that you do fitness trackers and you'll do like company sponsored fitness programs, and you don't realize that you are signing up for them to basically have access to all of your information off of your fitness tracker. And it is nuts, because some of those fitness trackers, like I have one, and if you are not paying attention to your security settings, you just gave the person GPS data on how to locate you and watch exactly where you go. Okay, then we talked about advanced surveillance technologies and stalking apps. And that is the end for today. Yeah, location and health information. And honestly, I think that though I'm hoping they'll eventually put an amendment in for like HIPAA and consider it part of your health information, because basically the stuff you're giving them should not be shareable information. But you know, it's one of those, the technology is far more advanced than the laws.
It's also that the technology can be used in a lot of ways, so it behooves those who make the technology to not let those laws, or to fight as hard as they can against those laws.
Yep. And I would like to see more fighting of lobbyists and things like that by those companies, but you know.
I mean, but the people who fight it are the ones that are paid.
Yeah, exactly.
by the companies, so
That's exactly the problem right there.
I heard a headline recently where I think it's like IoT devices for attentiveness tracking are getting more and more invasive, and they're like assuming at some point it's gonna hit a breaking point if they're trying to like have your eye movement or something. Like something's gonna end up being the tripwire that
Yeah.
actually has a real conversation about it.
Yeah, I could believe that. Yeah, that absolutely. IoT devices in general are a huge privacy issue because of the way that they're designed. So I could absolutely see that as being a next big IoT issue. Yeah, it should be risk enough.
I know what IoT does, but I can't think of what the acronym stands for right now. I on the
Internet of Things.
Oh, some reason, yeah, no, never mind. I was thinking something completely different.
No, it's okay. It's because we have to deal with so many acronyms. Yeah, basically it just means any device that can be connected to the internet. That is the bare basic what IoT devices are. Okay, are there any questions? Or yeah, I know, right? Exactly. Are there any other questions or any other ethical things that you guys want to talk about in conjunction with what we were just discussing? Yeah, smart toilets. That one always kind of scares me a little bit. Okay, the Cengage, I'm not sure if you guys heard me or I posted something out there. The link is broken off of the Black. In fact, I just got an email. Maybe they've actually fixed it. No, of course they haven't. The link is broken. So the Blackboard Cengage link, it does not see that there's actually a class there. So if you have already clicked on the Blackboard link and gone into Cengage, you can go into Cengage and sign in through there, and you should be able to see your class that way. Did somebody? Sorry, I thought someone just popped up. But otherwise, I'm waiting for their person to fix our stuff, because I cannot. Yeah, you can open straight through Cengage. I was able to open through Cengage. But when it comes to tying it to Blackboard says, no, there's no class there. So I'm not sure what broke, but I talked to them and they're working on it. So I'm not sure if it's a CWI issue, a Blackboard issue, or a Cengage issue, but that's what's going on. I will go out and try to get just a straight. In fact, I think I can give you guys just the link to Cengage. Oh no, that's my instructor center. I think if you just go to cengage.com, you should be able to log in and Yeah, Easter, yeah, that's true. There, Easter weekend, it's possible that we may not see anybody in there. If we have problems and they do not get it fixed, I will adjust due dates because I don't expect people to turn things in when they can't reach the material. So stuff like that happens. On yours, if it doesn't show up, it means that you didn't originally click on the link and get enrolled through Blackboard first before the link broke. So until they fix the link, that's the issue. It could be DNS, and I have no idea what particular part of it broke, but unfortunately it's a part I don't have access to. So for now, I will keep an eye out and I will post on Discord as soon as they get it fixed. Yeah, it's possible that Cengage's hamster just needs some coffee. I don't know. So those of you that can go out there and read, all of the PowerPoints are out there on Blackboard, so you can get to those. Yeah, it's possible that they might also be having some lag times too. So like I said, if we're having problems over this whole weekend because it's a holiday weekend and nobody gets back to me, then I'm not going to assume make you guys like turn stuff in, because if you can't get to it, you can't turn it in. So I will extend it throughout give you basically 2 weeks instead of a 1 week. Is there any other questions before we head off for the end of the evening? No, it looks like we're good. Okay. If you have any questions, hang out. If you need any help, hang out. Otherwise, have a good night. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Hey, Anna, I thought you might, have you heard what YouTube's trying to force through?
No, what's